The bell above the diner door chimed at 2 o'clock in the morning. He was just a guy in a damp tailored coat, nursing black coffee, trying to wash the metallic taste of a rough night out of his mouth. Then, the exhausted waitress leaned over to refill his mug. She paused. Her eyes dropped to his hand, to the heavy scarred gold band on his right index finger. "Sir," she muttered deadpan, "my mother has a ring exactly like yours." The coffee kept pouring. He didn't move, he just stopped breathing. The diner smelled of burnt sugar, industrial bleach, and old grease. It was a scent Gabriel Costa usually avoided, but tonight it was the only place open on a stretch of highway that didn't ask questions. He sat in a cracked vinyl booth near the back facing the door. Habit. Even when his bones ached with a deep, marrow-deep exhaustion, he sat where he could see everyone. Tonight, everyone consisted of a sleeping truck driver in the corner, and a waitress who looked like she was running on fumes and sheer spite. Gabriel stared at the black surface of his coffee. He was 34, but the last 48 hours had aged him a decade. There was a faint crescent of dried blood under his left thumbnail. He caught sight of it, frowned, and quietly scraped it away with a napkin. The world he ran required order, it required cleanliness. But the transition from the violence of the docks to the fluorescent hum of a roadside diner was always jarring. He didn't want to drink, he wanted quiet. Across the room, Chloe Mercer shifted her weight off her left foot. Her orthopedic shoes gave a pathetic squeak against the linoleum. She was 25, but the harsh overhead lights and the double shifts drew sharp, cynical lines around her mouth. She didn't care about the guy in the expensive wool coat sitting in her section. Rich guys in cheap diners at 2 o'clock in the morning were either lost, drunk, or hiding. She didn't get paid enough to care which one he was. She just wanted to wipe down the counters, flip the open sign to closed, and go home to see if her mother had remembered to eat. Chloe grabbed the glass coffee pot off the burner. The handle was warm, familiar. She walked over to Gabriel's booth, her face set in a practiced mask of polite apathy. "Warm you up?" she asked. Her voice was slightly raspy, worn down by hours of taking orders from people who barely looked at her. Gabriel didn't look up. He just nudged the thick ceramic mug toward the edge of the table. "Please." Chloe tipped the pot. The dark liquid streamed into the cup. As she poured, her gaze drifted downward. He had large hands, knuckles slightly swollen, bruised, but it was the ring on his right index finger that caught her attention. It wasn't a standard piece of jewelry. It was a heavy, crude block of dull gold, stamped with a highly unusual crest. A pair of scales heavily unbalanced with a jagged fracture running straight through the metal. It looked ancient. It looked like a mistake someone had purposefully made. Chloe's brain, fogged by exhaustion, bypassed her usual filter. "Sir," she said, her tone flat, conversational. "My mother has a ring exactly like yours." Gabriel froze. He didn't flinch, he didn't gasp, his entire body simply went completely, unnaturally still. The rhythm of his breathing stopped. His eyes, dark and flat as river stones, finally lifted from the table and locked onto her face. Chloe didn't immediately notice the shift in him. She was watching the cup. The coffee reached the brim. "Whoa," she muttered, pulling the pot back just as a few drops spilled over the rim and hit the table. "Sorry about that. Long night." Gabriel stared at her. His voice, when it came, was dangerously soft. It was a voice used to giving orders in rooms where people didn't speak out of turn. "What did you say?" Chloe blinked, stepping back, suddenly hyper-aware of the space between them. The air in the booth felt suddenly thinner. "I said I'm sorry. I'll get a rag to wipe that up." Before that, Gabriel's hand flattened on the table. The gold ring caught the harsh light. "What did you say about this ring?" It wasn't a question, it was a command. Chloe frowned, her defensive walls snapping into place. She dealt with weirdos all the time, but the sudden cold intensity radiating off this man made the hairs on her arms stand up. "Nothing, just a stupid observation. My mom has a ring with that same weird broken scale thing on it. Kept it in a cigar box since I was a kid. Forget I mentioned it." She turned to walk away. Gabriel's hand shot out. He didn't grab her wrist. He knew better than to make a scene, but his fingers clamped around the edge of the table with enough force that his knuckles turned white. "Wait," Gabriel said. He forced his muscles to relax. He manufactured a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry." It's a custom piece, a family heirloom. I didn't think there were any others." Chloe studied him. She didn't buy the smile for a second. "Well, I guess your jeweler made two. Have a good night, sir." She walked away, her spine stiff, disappearing behind the counter into the kitchen. Gabriel sat alone in the booth. The silence in his head was deafening. There were no other rings. There were only 3 ever made. One was on his finger. One was buried with his father. And the third belonged to the man who had orchestrated the car bomb that killed Gabriel's older brother 12 years ago. The man who had vanished like smoke. Gabriel reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and laid it neatly over the spilled coffee. He slid out of the booth, the leather squeaking against his coat. He paused at the counter, his eyes scanning the space behind the register. Taped to the wall next to the schedule was a list of employees. Shift 2, Chloe the 1000th. Gabriel walked out into the damp night air. The cold hit his face, but he barely felt it. The past, which he had spent a decade trying to hunt down and butcher, had just poured him a cup of coffee. The engine of the black SUV purred with a low, menacing idle in the alley across from the diner. Gabriel sat in the passenger seat. The window rolled down just enough to let the sharp scent of incoming rain filter through. Behind the wheel sat Dean. Dean was built like a cinder block and had the temperament of a bored librarian until someone crossed him. He watched the street, tapping his thumbs against the leather steering wheel. "You're telling me," Dean said, his voice a low gravel rumble, "that out of every late-night greasy spoon in this miserable state, you walked into the one where a waitress knows about the scale." "She didn't just know about it," Gabriel corrected, staring out the window. He was watching the diner's back door. "She said her mother has it." Dean stopped tapping. He turned his head slowly. "Thomas Vance's ring." Gabriel didn't reply. He didn't need to. Thomas Vance was a ghost story in their syndicate. He was the insider, the trusted lieutenant who had sold out Gabriel's family to a rival outfit, rigged the explosives, and disappeared before the flames even died down. Gabriel had spent his early 20s turning the city upside down, tearing through Vance's associates, his safe houses, his bank accounts. Nothing. The man had evaporated. If Vance is her father, Dean started doing the math. "She said her mother had it," Gabriel interrupted. He rubbed his eyes, the fatigue finally catching up to him, settling deep in his temples. "Vance didn't have a wife. He didn't have kids. We tore his life apart, Dean. We knew everything about him. There was no woman. There was no daughter. People hide things, especially guys who know they're going to turn rat." Dean shifted the car into gear. "You want me to bring her in?" "No." Gabriel's answer was sharp, immediate. Dean raised an eyebrow. "Gabe, if she's connected to Vance." I said no. "You don't grab civilians off the street because of a passing comment. She didn't recognize me. She didn't know what the ring meant. If she knew who I was, she would have poisoned the coffee or run out the back door. She was just making conversation." Gabriel looked at his own hand, twisting the heavy gold band. "I want you to dig. Her name is Chloe the 1000th. She works the graveyard shift at the Starlight Diner on Route 9. Find out her last name, find out where she lives, and find out everything you can about her mother." "And if the mother is Vance's widow?" Gabriel's eyes hardened, the cynical, cold pragmatism returning. "Then we find out where she's keeping his corpse or where he's hiding." Across town, Chloe was dealing with a different kind of ghost. She turned the key in the deadbolt of her apartment. The door stuck, requiring a harsh shove with her shoulder to finally give way. She stepped inside, immediately hit by the familiar smell of antiseptic wipes and stale chamomile tea. The apartment was small, cramped, but violently clean. Chloe dropped her keys in a ceramic bowl by the door and kicked off her squeaky shoes, groaning as the pressure released from her blistered heels. "Mom," she called out softly into the dim living room. The only light came from the muted television. Sitting in a worn floral armchair was Evelyn. She was 52, but illness had hollowed out her cheeks and turned her dark hair entirely silver. She was staring at an infomercial, her hands resting idly in her lap. "Chloe," Evelyn murmured, not looking away from the screen. "You're late. The bus?" "Yeah, Mom, the bus." Chloe walked over, pulling a thick knit blanket up to her mother's shoulders. She checked the pill organizer on the side table. Tuesday night was empty. Good. She remembered to take her medication. Evelyn suffered from early onset dementia, compounded by a weak heart. Some days, she was sharp, biting, the pragmatic single mother who had raised Chloe with a fierce, uncompromising love. Other days, she was lost in a past Chloe didn't understand, talking to people who weren't in the room, terrified of shadows. "I made $50 in tips tonight," Chloe said, trying to inject some warmth into the quiet room. "We can get the good groceries tomorrow, maybe some of that fresh salmon you like." Evelyn finally looked at her, her eyes, usually clouded, suddenly sharpened. It was a terrifying clarity that always put Chloe on edge. "Did you lock the deadbolt?" "Yes, Mom, I locked it." "The chain, Chloe. Lock the chain." Evelyn's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "They come when it's quiet, when you think the shift is over." Chloe sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. "Mom, no one is coming. We live on the 4th floor in the middle of nowhere. It's safe." To placate her, Chloe walked back to the door and slid the metal chain into place. As she walked toward her cramped bedroom, she paused by the small bookshelf in the hallway. On the bottom shelf sat a rusted metal cigar box. It held old photographs, a few birth certificates, and a heavy gold ring. Chloe pulled the box out and opened it. The ring sat heavy in her palm. It felt cold. She traced the jagged crack through the engraved scales. She thought of the man in the diner, the expensive coat, the dead flat eyes, the way he had gone completely still, like a predator catching a scent. "I didn't think there were any others," he had said. Chloe wasn't stupid. She had grown up poor, which meant she had grown up observant. Men who wore tailored wool coats and had bruised knuckles didn't sit in roadside diners at 2 o'clock in the morning because they were upstanding citizens, and they certainly didn't wear custom heavy gold rings as a fashion statement. She looked at her mother, who was back to staring blankly at the television. "Mom," Chloe asked quietly, "where did you really get this ring?" Evelyn didn't answer. She just pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, shivering in a room that wasn't cold. Chloe put the ring back in the box and closed the lid. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Tomorrow, she decided, she would take it to a pawn shop. She would sell it, melt it down, whatever. She didn't want it in the house anymore. By 4 p.m. the next day, Gabriel Costa knew exactly who Chloe Mercer was. He sat at his heavy oak desk in the study of his home, staring at the file Dean had just placed in front of him. Outside, the rain had finally broken, leaving the sky a bruised, ugly purple. "Chloe Mercer," Dean recited, standing with his hands clasped behind his back. 25, no criminal record. Dropped out of community college 3 years ago. Works 2 jobs, the diner at night and bagging groceries at a supermarket during the day. Drowning in medical debt. The mother, Gabriel said, not looking up from a printed photograph of Chloe walking out of the diner. Her face pulled tight against the wind. "Evelyn Mercer," Dean answered. His tone shifted, growing slightly tense. "That's where it gets weird. Evelyn Mercer didn't exist before 24 years ago. No birth certificate under that name. No social security history before 2002. She just appeared in the system, rented a cheap apartment, and had a baby. Chloe." Gabriel slowly closed the file. He leaned back in his leather chair, the leather creaking in the silent room. 2002. The year Thomas Vance disappeared. The year Gabriel's brother was killed. "You think she was Vance's woman?" Gabriel said quietly. "He put her in hiding before he skipped town." "It fits," Dean nodded. "Vance knew the heat was coming. He set her up with a new identity, gave her some cash, and left her the ring as a promise he'd come back. Only, he never did." "Or," Gabriel countered, his voice chillingly calm. "Vance didn't leave the ring as a promise. He gave it to her to hide. It's proof. If she has the ring, she knows what happened to him. She knows where the money went. She knows who he was working for." Gabriel stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Where is Chloe right now? Her shift at the supermarket ended an hour ago. She's probably heading home, or taking a nap before her diner shift." Dean paused. "Gabe, what's the play here? We kicking the door of a sick woman and a waitress?" Gabriel stopped at the door. He looked back at Dean, his expression unreadable. "I don't hurt civilians, Dean. You know that. But if Evelyn Mercer knows who paid Vance to kill my brother, I'll tear that apartment apart to find it. Get the car." The diner was empty when Chloe walked in for her graveyard shift. The fluorescent lights buzzed their familiar headache-inducing hum. She tied her apron around her waist, her mind heavy. She had tried to pawn the ring that afternoon. The pawnbroker, a sketchy guy who usually took anything, had taken one look at the crest through his loupe, paled, and slid it back across the counter. I don't touch cartel markers, kid. Get that out of my shop. Cartel marker. The words echoed in her head as she filled the coffee machines. Her mother wasn't just hiding from a bad ex-boyfriend. She was hiding from ghosts with guns. The bell above the door chimed. Chloe turned, a polite greeting dying in her throat. It was him, the man from last night. Gabriel Costa walked in. He wasn't wearing the coat tonight, just a dark tailored suit, no tie. He looked less exhausted, more focused, predatory. Chloe felt a spike of genuine fear, but she shoved it down, anchoring herself in her cynical, exhausted reality. She grabbed a menu and walked over to the counter as he sat down on a stool. You back to tip me another 100 for spilling coffee? She asked, her voice steady, though she kept a physical distance. Gabriel looked at her, really looked at her. In the harsh light, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the frayed edges of her collar. She wasn't playing a game. She was exactly what she appeared to be. A girl carrying the weight of the world, completely unaware that she was standing on a landmine. No, Gabriel said softly. He placed his hands on the counter. The ring was noticeably absent from his finger. He had left it in the car. He didn't want to spook her more than he already had. I'm back for pie, cherry, if you have it. Chloe eyed him suspiciously. We only have apple, and it's from yesterday. Apple's fine. She cut a slice, slid it onto a plate, and pushed it toward him. She didn't offer to warm it up. Look, mister, if you're here because of what I said last night, I was joking. I don't have a ring. My mom doesn't have a ring. I just wanted to make conversation. My mistake. Gabriel picked up the cheap metal fork. He didn't eat. You went to a pawn shop on 4th Street this afternoon. The owner kicked you out. Chloe froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale and suddenly very fragile looking. Her hand crept toward the panic button, and hidden under the lip of the counter. Don't press it, Gabriel said. His voice wasn't a threat. It was almost gentle. I'm not here to hurt you, Chloe. I'm here because the ring your mother has belongs to a man who took something very important from my family. I just need to talk to her. Chloe's breathing quickened. He knew her name. He had followed her. The cynical armor she wore every day suddenly felt paper thin against a man who could easily tear her life apart. My mother is sick, Chloe said, her voice shaking with a sudden fierce anger. She has dementia. She doesn't remember what she had for breakfast, let alone who she got a piece of jewelry from 20 years ago. Leave us alone. Gabriel watched the fire in her eyes. It surprised him. Most people folded when he cornered them. This girl, with her blistered feet and cheap uniform, was baring her teeth at a wolf. He felt a strange, jarring twist of respect, empathy even, an emotion he hadn't entertained in years. He opened his mouth to speak, to try and de-escalate, when the bell above the door chimed violently. The door didn't just open, it was shoved inward. 2 men walked in. They were heavy-set, wearing leather jackets that smelled heavily of cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. They didn't look like customers, they looked like blunt instruments. Gabriel's instincts flared instantly. The air in the diner shifted from tense to lethal. He didn't turn around, but he watched their reflection in the stainless steel backing of the coffee machines. They weren't looking at him, they were looking at Chloe. Chloe Mercer? The first man asked. He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled a suppressed pistol from his jacket. Back door now. Chloe let out a choked gasp, backing up against the pie case, her hands raised. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He didn't think about the fact that she was the daughter of his enemy's woman. He didn't think about his own safety. He just moved. He lunged off the stool, grabbing the heavy ceramic coffee pot from the burner. In one fluid, violent motion, he spun and hurled the boiling pot directly at the first man's face. The glass shattered. Boiling coffee and shards exploded over the man. He screamed, dropping the gun as he clawed at his burning eyes. The second man raised his weapon, but Gabriel was already there. He closed the distance, grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it sharply until the bone snapped with a sickening crack, and drove his knee into the man's ribs. The man collapsed, wheezing on the linoleum floor. Silence descended on the diner, save for the agonized groans of the 2 men on the floor, and the steady dripping of coffee from the ceiling tiles. Gabriel stood up, straightening his suit jacket. He didn't look at the men. He turned to Chloe, who was pressed against the counter, her eyes wide with absolute terror. He stepped over the bodies and walked up to her. He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and gently wiped a stray drop of spilled coffee from the counter near her hand. "Like I said, Chloe." Gabriel spoke softly, his dark eyes locking onto hers, ignoring the carnage on the floor between them. "I'm not here to hurt you, but those men are. And if they found you, they've already found your mother." Gabriel didn't ask for permission. He grabbed Chloe's elbow, his grip a tight, uncompromising vice, and pulled her toward the diner's back exit. She stumbled, her rubber-soled shoes squeaked violently against the linoleum. Her brain was misfiring, stuck on a loop of the sickening crunch of the second hitman's arm breaking. She tried to plant her feet. "My purse," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "My keys." Gabriel didn't break stride. He reached behind the counter, snatched her worn canvas tote off the hook, and shoved open the heavy metal fire door. The alley was freezing. The rain had started again. A fine, freezing mist that coated the brick walls. A black SUV idled 50 feet away. The headlights flicked on, blinding her for a fraction of a second. The rear door swung open from the inside before they even reached it. "Get in," Gabriel ordered. Chloe balked. The cold air hit her face, snapping her out of her shock. She looked at the tinted windows, the heavy armor of the vehicle, and then at the man in the bespoke suit, whose knuckles were now dripping fresh blood onto the wet asphalt. "I don't know you," she said, backing up a step, her shoulder hitting the damp brick of the alley. "I'm not getting in a car with a guy who just broke a man in half over cherry pie." Gabriel turned to her. The flat, predatory calm was gone, replaced by a harsh, grating urgency. "Those men were professionals, Chloe. They didn't come to rob the register. They came to put a bullet in the back of your head, and then they were going to drive to your apartment and do the same to your mother. Now get in the goddamn car." He didn't yell, but the gravel in his voice left no room for debate. Chloe's chest heaved. She thought of Evelyn sitting in the floral armchair entirely defenseless. She practically dove into the back seat. Gabriel slid in right behind her, pulling the door shut with a heavy vault-like thud. "Drive," Gabriel said. Dean floored it. The SUV tore out of the alley, tires gripping the wet pavement. "Address?" Dean barked, glancing at the rearview mirror. Chloe rattled off the street name. Her hands were shaking violently now. She buried them in the pockets of her uniform apron. The drive was a blur of neon streetlights, bleeding across the wet glass. Gabriel sat in the seat next to her, staring straight ahead. He pulled a dark cloth from his pocket and systematically wiped the blood from his hands. The metallic smell of it mixed with the scent of wet wool and expensive leather. "How far?" Gabriel asked. 10 minutes, Chloe said. Her teeth clicked together. She couldn't stop shivering. "Traffic is light. Dean, do it in 5. The engine roared as Dean ran a red light, swerving around a late-night delivery truck. Chloe stared at Gabriel's profile. "Who are you?" "My name is Gabriel Costa." He didn't look at her. "And the man who gave your mother that ring murdered my brother 12 years ago." Chloe felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. Costa. She didn't follow organized crime. "But you didn't grow up in this city without hearing that name whispered. They owned the ports. They owned half the politicians. My mother is a 52-year-old woman with a failing heart," Chloe snapped. The sheer absurdity of the situation, fueling a spike of defensive rage. "She clips coupons. She watches infomercials. She didn't murder anyone." "Maybe not," Gabriel replied, his voice devoid of sympathy, "but she knows the ghost who did. And someone else figured that out tonight." The SUV skidded to a halt in front of a crumbling brick apartment complex. The streetlight above them was burnt out. The building looked like a rotting tooth in the jawline of the city block. "Stay here," Gabriel told Dean. He unbuttoned his jacket. Chloe caught the dull gleam of a shoulder holster before he stepped out into the rain. She scrambled out after him. She wasn't about to let a mobster walk into her home alone. They took the stairs. The elevator had been broken for 3 months. Chloe's lungs burned as they hit the 4th-floor landing. The hallway smelled of stale cigarette smoke and boiled cabbage. Chloe stopped dead. Down the hall, her apartment door was ajar. The cheap wood around the deadbolt was splintered. The metal security chain hung uselessly, severed cleanly in half by a pair of bolt cutters. Gabriel stepped in front of her, pushing her back against the peeling wallpaper. He drew his weapon. It wasn't a movie gun. It was matte black, heavy, and purely functional. He moved with terrifying silence. He nudged the door open with his foot. The apartment was dark. The television was off. Gabriel cleared the living room in 3 seconds, empty. He moved to the kitchen, empty. Chloe followed behind him, her hand pressed over her mouth. The floral armchair was tipped backward. The ceramic bowl where she kept her keys was shattered on the linoleum. "Mom," Chloe whispered, panic finally clawing up her throat. Gabriel held up a hand, silencing her. He stood perfectly still in the narrow hallway between the bedroom and the bathroom. He tilted his head, listening. A faint rhythmic scraping sound was coming from the bathroom. Gabriel leveled his gun at the cracked door. He pushed it open with 2 fingers. The small bathroom was pitch black, save for the amber light filtering through the frosted window. Wedged into the narrow gap between the porcelain toilet and the bathtub was Evelyn. Her knees were pulled to her chest. In her right hand, she clutched a rusted gardening trowel, scraping the metal edge against the tile floor in a steady rhythmic tick. She was staring straight ahead, her eyes wide, entirely unseeing. "Mom." Chloe shoved past Gabriel, dropping to her knees on the cold tile. Gabriel immediately lowered his weapon, clicking the safety back on and holstering it under his jacket. He watched the waitress pull the older woman into her arms. "It's okay, I'm here," Chloe sobbed, burying her face in her mother's silver hair. Evelyn didn't blink. She kept a death grip on the trowel. "They didn't knock," she muttered, her voice hollow, echoing from a place 20 years in the past. "Thomas said they would knock. They just broke the wood." Gabriel's jaw tightened. He stepped back into the hallway. They hadn't found her. Or more likely, Evelyn's paranoia had saved her. She had heard the footsteps on the stairs, and hidden before the door was breached. But they would come back. He walked into the living room, and picked up the shattered pieces of the deadbolt from the floor. The metal was sheared clean, professional. "Quiet. Pack a bag," Gabriel called out, his voice cutting through the quiet crying in the bathroom. "Medications, clothes. You have 3 minutes. We are not staying here." The safe house wasn't a sprawling mansion. It was a brutalist concrete and glass structure tucked into the dense woods 2 hours north of the city. High fences, thermal cameras, heavy steel doors that locked with a magnetic clunk that vibrated through the floorboards. Gabriel poured 2 glasses of tap water in the pristine stainless steel kitchen. The house smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner. Down the hall, Dr. Aries, a man who asked no questions and was paid exorbitantly for that exact quality, was checking Evelyn's vitals in one of the guest rooms. Chloe sat at the kitchen island. She hadn't taken off her apron. It was stained with cherry pie filling and a splash of Gabriel's spilled coffee. She looked like a casualty of war sitting in a high-end furniture showroom. Gabriel slid a glass of water across the marble counter. "Drink," he said. Chloe stared at the glass. "Who is paying for the doctor?" "I am." "I don't want your money," she said, her voice raspy but hard. "I'll sign an IOU. I can pick up extra shifts at the supermarket." Gabriel let out a short, humorless exhale. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. He looked at her blistered, swollen feet in the squeaky orthopedic shoes, and then at the stubborn jut of her chin. "You aren't going back to the supermarket, Chloe," he said quietly. "You aren't going back to the diner. The life you had yesterday is over. It expired the second those men walked through the door. You don't get to decide that," she fired back, her hands curling into fists on the countertop. "I have a lease. I have hospital bills. I can't just vanish into the woods because you're playing mob boss." Gabriel didn't rise to the bait. He didn't get angry. He simply laid out the math. The men at the diner were foot soldiers, cheap muscle hired through a third party. But the people who ordered the hit know exactly who you are. They know Evelyn Mercer is a fake name. They know your mother was hiding Thomas, and they know she kept a piece of him. Gabriel picked up his own glass, taking a slow sip. "Thomas stole $5 million from my family. He planted explosives under my brother's car. He turned our operation upside down and then vanished. For 12 years I thought he was dead. Now I find out he left behind a woman and a kid." Chloe flinched at the word kid. She never talked about him, ever. Growing up, it was just us. "We moved 4 times before I was 10. We always lived in cash. No credit cards, no photos." "She was protecting you," Gabriel said, a strange softness entering his tone. "She knew what Thomas was involved in." "Then why didn't you know about us?" Chloe demanded, her eyes narrowing. "You said your people tore the city apart looking for him. If you're so powerful, how did a waitress and a sick woman slip through the cracks?" It was a good question. It was the question that had been burning a hole in Gabriel's gut since Dean handed him the file. The Costa Syndicate didn't miss things. They owned the police records. They owned the bank databases. Evelyn Mercer shouldn't have been able to hide for 2 decades without help. Someone on the inside had scrubbed her from the map. Before he could answer, the heavy footsteps of Dr. Eris echoed down the hall. The doctor walked into the kitchen, snapping off his latex gloves. Her heart rate is elevated, but she's stable, Eris reported, not looking at Gabriel, keeping his eyes politely focused on the marble counter. I've administered a mild sedative. The dementia is advanced, Mr. Costa. The stress of the relocation, it's going to accelerate the cognitive. She needs a stable environment. She has one, Gabriel said. He nodded toward the door. Dean will drive you back to the city. Be available. Eris nodded and left the kitchen. The front door closed with a heavy metallic thud. Chloe buried her face in her hands. The sheer exhaustion was finally breaking through her adrenaline. She was 25, but she felt incredibly, impossibly old. Gabriel watched her. In his world, people were assets or liabilities. Chloe Mercer was a massive liability. She was a civilian wrapped in a mystery that threatened to ignite a war he thought he had already won. The smart, cynical move was to interrogate the mother, take the ring and cut them loose. Let the wolves have them. He looked at her trembling shoulders. He remembered the way she had stood between him and the hitmen, her hand hovering over a useless panic button. Go sleep, Gabriel said softly. The room at the end of the hall is yours. No one gets through that front door without a heavily armed battalion. You're safe here tonight. Chloe slowly lowered her hands. She looked at him, her eyes bloodshot, defensive, and fiercely intelligent. Nothing is safe, she said flatly. I learned that when I was 6. She slid off the bar stool and walked down the hallway without another word. Gabriel stood alone in the kitchen. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. Dean, Gabriel said when the line clicked open. The men at the diner, you clean it up. Done. Dean's voice crackled. But Gabe, they didn't have ID. Burner phones only. However, I ran the plates on their car. It wasn't stolen. Gabriel's grip tightened on the phone. Who is it registered to? A shell company, Dean said slowly. A shell company that our accountant set up 3 years ago. Gabe, the hit wasn't ordered by a ghost. It came from inside the house. Gabriel hung up. The silence of the safe house pressed in on him. The war wasn't over. It had just been sleeping. Morning broke over the safe house, in a wash of pale gray light. The rain had stopped, leaving the dense pine trees outside the bulletproof windows dripping and dark. Gabriel was awake. He hadn't slept. He sat in the leather armchair in the study, a heavily fortified room with no windows, staring at a corkboard he had erected against the far wall. On it were old photographs, crime scenes, financial ledgers. At the center was a grainy surveillance photo of Thomas, taken a week before the explosion. The door to the study clicked open. Gabriel's hand instinctively dropped toward the drawer where he kept his weapon, but he stopped. Evelyn stood in the doorway. She was wearing an oversized gray sweater Chloe had packed for her. Her silver hair was brushed. She didn't look terrified anymore. She looked unnervingly calm. You shouldn't be wandering around, Gabriel said, keeping his voice low and steady. Evelyn walked into the room. She ignored his comment entirely. She stopped a few feet from the corkboard and stared at the photo of Thomas. He always hated having his picture taken, Evelyn murmured. Said it stole a piece of your soul. I told him he didn't have one left to steal. Gabriel stood up slowly. Her eyes were clear. The fog of the dementia had temporarily rolled back, leaving behind the sharp, observant woman who had managed to evade the Mafia for 20 years. Evelyn turned her head and looked directly at Gabriel. She studied his face, the harsh line of his jaw, the dark, flat intensity of his eyes. You're the Costa boy, she said. It wasn't a question. The younger one, Leo's brother. Gabriel felt a cold spike of adrenaline hit his chest. He hadn't introduced himself to her. You remember me? I remember the funeral, Evelyn said softly. I stood across the street in the rain. I watched you cry. You were just a kid. You look like him now, the angry one. Thomas killed my brother, Evelyn. I know. Evelyn's voice didn't waver. There were no apologies, just the heavy, blunt truth of a survivor. He came back to the apartment that night, covered in drywall dust and engine oil. He told me he did what he had to do to get us out. He said the Costa family was going to kill him anyway. He was a rat. Gabriel spat, the old hatred flaring up, hot and bitter. He sold us out to the West Side crew for a payday. Evelyn shook her head slowly. A sad, knowing smile touched her thin lips. You really believe that? After all this time, you think Thomas was the mastermind? Gabriel frowned, the air in the room suddenly feeling very dense. What are you talking about? Thomas was a dog, Gabriel, a loyal, vicious dog, but he didn't hold the leash. Before Gabriel could press her, hurried footsteps sounded in the hallway. Chloe appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, her eyes wide with panic. She stopped when she saw her mother standing calmly in the study. "Mom!" Chloe exhaled, rushing over and grabbing Evelyn's arm. "You can't just wander off. I woke up and you were gone." "I'm fine, Chloe," Evelyn said, patting her daughter's hand. She looked back at Gabriel. She brought the box, the rusted one. "Ask her for it." Chloe froze. She looked at Gabriel, then down at the canvas tote bag she had slung over her shoulder. "Give it to him," Evelyn commanded. Her voice was suddenly authoritative, echoing the mother Chloe had known as a child. Hesitantly, Chloe reached into the tote and pulled out the old rusted metal cigar box. She walked over and placed it on Gabriel's heavy oak desk. Gabriel looked at it like it was a live grenade. He reached out and flipped the latch. Inside sat a few old Polaroids, a birth certificate, and a heavy gold ring with the broken scales. Gabriel picked up the ring. It was a perfect match to the one he had left locked in a safe back at his main estate. He set it aside. He looked at Evelyn. "This is it?" "Look deeper," Evelyn said, her eyes already beginning to glaze over as the fleeting moment of clarity started to slip away. "He told me to hide it. If anything happened to him, it was the insurance." Gabriel emptied the contents onto the desk. He picked up the empty metal box. It was surprisingly heavy. He ran his thumbs along the rusted inner edges. The bottom wasn't flush with the corners. He pulled a pocket knife from his suit trousers, wedged the blade into the microscopic gap at the corner of the box, and pried upward. With a sharp crack, a false metal bottom popped loose. Gabriel lifted the sheet of metal away. Underneath it lay a small black leather-bound notebook. The leather was dry and cracking. Chloe stepped closer, her curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. "What is that?" Gabriel didn't answer. He opened the notebook. The pages were filled with columns of numbers, bank routing codes, offshore accounts, dates. It was a shadow ledger, but it wasn't the numbers that made the blood freeze in Gabriel's veins. It was the handwriting. It wasn't Thomas's crude, blocky script. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, and painfully familiar. It was the handwriting of a man Gabriel had trusted implicitly, a man who had mentored him after his brother's death. Gabriel flipped to the very last page. There was a single entry dated the day before the car bomb killed Leo. "Payment cleared. T takes the fall. The kid inherits the throne." Gabriel stared at the words. The air left his lungs. Thomas hadn't betrayed the family for a rival crew. Thomas had been paid to murder the heir apparent by someone inside the Costa family. Someone who wanted Gabriel, young, angry, and easily manipulated, to take control. "Who wrote that?" Chloe asked, watching the color drain from Gabriel's face. She had never seen the man look anything but completely in control. Now, he looked like a building collapsing from the inside out. Gabriel slowly closed the notebook. His knuckles, bruised from the night before, were white. "My uncle," Gabriel whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "He ordered the hit on my brother." The silence in the room was absolute. Gabriel looked at Chloe, the cynical, exhausted waitress, and Evelyn, the sick, forgotten ghost. They weren't collateral damage. They were the only living proof of a 12-year-old treason. And the man who wanted them dead wasn't a ghost. He was sitting at the head of Gabriel's own table. The silence in the study was suffocating. It felt thick, like breathing in wet concrete. Gabriel stared at the black leather notebook. His thumb traced the jagged, elegant handwriting of Raymond Costa, his uncle, the man who had stood beside him in the rain 12 years ago, resting a heavy, comforting hand on Gabriel's shoulder as his brother's casket was lowered into the earth. The man who had taught him how to shoot, how to negotiate, how to lead. It was all a lie. The grief, the mentorship, the legacy. Raymond hadn't been grooming a successor. He had been shaping a weapon he could control. He had used Thomas to clear the board, letting Gabriel tear the city apart, looking for a ghost, completely blind to the snake sleeping in his own house. Chloe stood frozen by the desk. She didn't know the intricacies of Mafia politics, but she recognized the look on Gabriel's face. It was the look of a man watching the foundation of his entire life crumble to dust. Evelyn, her brief window of terrifying clarity already shutting, wandered over to the bookshelf, running her fingers aimlessly over the spines of the heavy legal texts. The ledger meant nothing to her anymore. The danger was a distant echo. "Dean," Gabriel barked. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual smooth veneer. The heavy study door opened instantly. Dean stepped in, his eyes scanning the room, immediately clocking the tension. He looked at the rusted cigar box, the false bottom, and the black book resting in front of his boss. "Get Evelyn back to her room, lock the door, then pack the SUV," Gabriel ordered, his eyes never leaving the page. "We're going back to the city." Gabe," Dean cautioned, stepping forward. "If Raymond ordered the hit on the diner, he knows we're in the wind. He controls the eastern docks. He controls half our muscle. Walking into the city right now is a death sentence. He doesn't know we have the ledger," Gabriel said. He finally looked up. His eyes were completely hollow, devoid of anything resembling humanity. He thinks he's tying up a loose end from 20 years ago. He thinks Evelyn Mercer is just a liability. He doesn't know she kept the receipts. Gabriel snapped the notebook shut and slid it into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. "We leave in 10. Dean didn't argue. He nodded, gently taking Evelyn by the elbow and leading the unresisting woman out of the room. Chloe didn't move. She stood her ground, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The stained diner apron still hung around her neck, a pathetic shield against the world of bullets and blood money. "You're going to kill him," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, cynical statement of fact. Gabriel walked past her, heading for the small armory closet built into the far wall. He punched a code into the keypad. The heavy steel door popped open, revealing rows of matte black weaponry and tactical gear. "I'm going to cut the rot out of my family," Gabriel replied coldly, grabbing a spare magazine and sliding it into his shoulder holster. "You stay here. The house is fortified. Dr. Aries will stay with you." "And what happens if you don't come back?" Chloe demanded. Her voice cracked, betraying the exhaustion she was desperately trying to hide. "What happens to us? Do your uncle's men come up here and finish the job? Do I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for a car bomb?" Gabriel stopped. He turned to face her. She was right. The illusion of safety was gone. If Raymond survived the night, he wouldn't stop until every trace of Thomas's past was erased. Gabriel walked back to the desk. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy black iron key. He tossed it onto the oak surface. It landed with a dull clatter next to the rusted cigar box. "There's a safe in the floor beneath the rug in the master bedroom," Gabriel said softly. "It holds $250,000 in untraceable cash, 3 blank passports, and the title to a property in Costa Rica under a shell corporation. If I don't call this house by sunrise, take your mother, take Dr. Aris's car, and disappear." Chloe stared at the key. $250,000. It was more money than she had ever seen. It would pay off the medical debt. It would buy the good groceries forever. It was a golden ticket handed to her by a murderer. She looked up from the key to Gabriel's hands. His knuckles were split open, the dried blood flaking against his pale skin. He had shattered a man's arm to keep her breathing. Chloe walked forward. She didn't take the key. Instead, she reached across the desk and gently grasped Gabriel's right wrist. Gabriel stiffened, his instincts screaming at the sudden contact, but he didn't pull away. "There's a first aid kit in the kitchen," Chloe, her voice dropping its defensive edge, leaving only a bone-deep weariness. "If you're going to go shoot your uncle, you should probably clean your hands first. Infection is a terrible way to die." Gabriel looked at her. For the first time in 12 years, the suffocating rage in his chest retreated, leaving a strange quiet space. He nodded once. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's clean them." The rain in the city hadn't stopped. It had turned into a torrential downpour, washing the grime of the streets into the overflowing gutters. The social club known as the Velvet Room sat in the heart of the Eastern District. It was an old-world cigar lounge lined with mahogany and smelling of imported tobacco and expensive scotch. It was Raymond Costa's sanctuary. Gabriel's SUV pulled up to the curb. There were no valets, just 2 heavy-set men in trench coats standing beneath the green awning. They stepped forward as Gabriel and Dean got out, the rain instantly soaking their shoulders. "Gabriel," the larger of the 2 men said, his hand resting casually inside his coat. "Raymond wasn't expecting you." "My uncle is always expecting me," Gabriel said flatly. He didn't break stride. The guards hesitated. Gabriel was the boss, but Raymond paid their specific salaries. It was a fraction of a second of indecision, but it was enough. Dean slammed the butt of his pistol into the first man's temple, catching his falling body, and dragging him into the shadows of the awning. Gabriel disarmed the second, driving a brutal elbow into the man's throat and leaving him gasping on the wet concrete. Gabriel pushed through the heavy brass doors. The club was empty save for the bartender polishing glasses and Raymond Costa sitting in a plush leather wingback chair by the unlit fireplace. Raymond was 60, with a thick head of silver hair and eyes that crinkled warmly when he smiled. He looked like a retired banker. He looked like a father. Raymond looked up from his glass of amber liquid. He saw Gabriel's soaked suit, the flat dead look in his nephew's eyes, and the suppressed pistol hanging loosely in his right hand. Raymond didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of his scotch. "I heard about the mess at the diner," Raymond said, his voice a soothing baritone. "Sloppy. We need to find out who ordered it. You shouldn't be out in the open, Gabriel. It's not safe." Gabriel walked across the Persian rug. His wet shoes made no sound. He stopped 10 feet from the chair. "Thomas had a daughter," Gabriel said. The words fell into the quiet room like stones into a dark well. Raymond's expression remained perfectly composed. "Thomas is dead, Gabriel. We buried that ghost 12 years ago. Whoever this girl is, she's trying to extort you. Her mother's Evelyn Mercer," Gabriel continued, his voice devoid of any inflection. "She kept a rusted cigar box on a bookshelf for 2 decades. Inside it was a ring." Gabriel reached into his pocket and tossed the heavy gold ring, Thomas's ring, onto the small table beside Raymond's glass. It landed with a heavy clink. Raymond looked at the ring, the broken scales. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. The warm eyes hardened into something reptilian and cold. "A piece of jewelry proves nothing," Raymond said softly. Gabriel reached into his other pocket. He pulled out the black leather notebook. He didn't toss it. He held it up, letting the dim light of the club catch the cracked leather. "It wasn't just the ring, Uncle," Gabriel whispered. The word uncle sounded like a curse. He kept the ledger, he kept the routing numbers, and he kept the final entry. "Payment cleared. T takes the fall. The kid inherits the throne." The silence returned. The bartender had vanished. It was just the two of them standing in the ruins of a family tree. Raymond slowly set his glass down. He didn't deny it. He didn't beg. He simply adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt. "Leo was weak," Raymond said. The soothing baritone was gone, replaced by a harsh, pragmatic gravel. "He had a bleeding heart, Gabriel. He wanted to legitimize the business. He wanted to pay taxes and sit on charity boards. He would have driven this family into the ground within 5 years. The wolves would have eaten us. So you paid a rat to blow him to pieces," Gabriel said, raising the gun. His hand, freshly bandaged by Chloe an hour ago, didn't shake. "I did what had to be done to save the family," Raymond snapped, finally showing his teeth. "I chose you. You had the fire. You had the pragmatism. Everything you have, everything you built, it's because I cleared the path for you." "You made me a monster," Gabriel said softly. "You were always a monster, Gabriel," Raymond sneered, leaning back in his chair. "I just gave you a crown." Raymond's hand twitched toward the cushion of the chair. Gabriel fired twice. The suppressed coughs of the pistol were quiet, muffled by the heavy mahogany walls. The glass of scotch shattered on the table. Raymond slumped back into the wingback chair. A dark blooming stain spread across the chest of his pristine white shirt. He looked at Gabriel, his mouth working silently for a moment, before his eyes clouded over and fixed on the ceiling. Gabriel stood there for a long time. He smelled the gunpowder. He smelled the spilled scotch. He felt nothing, no triumph, no closure, just a vast echoing emptiness. He had hunted his brother's killer for 12 years, only to find him sitting by the fire in his own home. Gabriel turned his back on the corpse, walked out through the brass doors, and stepped back into the freezing rain. By the time Gabriel returned to the safe house, the sky was beginning to bruise with the pale purple of dawn. The heavy steel front door unlocked with its familiar magnetic clunk. Gabriel stepped inside. The house was dead quiet. He shed his soaking wet suit jacket, dropping it onto the floor of the foyer. His white shirt was stuck to his skin, splattered mud, and a fine mist of blood near the collar. He walked toward the kitchen. Chloe was sitting exactly where he had left her. She was perched on the bar stool at the marble island. She had finally taken off the diner apron. She wore a plain gray t-shirt and her worn-out jeans. A cup of untouched cold coffee sat in front of her. She looked up when he entered. She saw the blood on his collar. She saw the hollow, exhausted slump of his shoulders. "Did you use the key?" Gabriel asked. His voice was hoarse. Chloe looked down at her hands. "I packed my mother's bags. Dr. Eris carried them to the car. I unlocked the safe. I touched the money. But you're still here." "I'm tired of running, Gabriel," Chloe said softly. She looked up, meeting his dead eyes with a fierce, unwavering clarity. "My mother ran for 20 years. She lived in paranoia. She hid behind fake names and deadbolts that didn't hold. I won't live like that. I won't be a ghost." Gabriel walked slowly around the counter. He stopped a few feet from her. He was a man who had just dismantled his own empire, a man covered in the blood of his own kin. "Raymond is dead," Gabriel stated flatly. "The men loyal to him will scramble for a few days, but Dean is already securing the assets. The hit on you and your mother is cancelled. You're safe." Safe," Chloe echoed, a bitter, cynical smile touching her lips. "I work a graveyard shift for tips, Gabriel. I have $50,000 in medical debt. I live in an apartment where the door is currently kicked in. I've never been safe." Gabriel reached into his pocket. He pulled out the rusted cigar box and set it on the marble counter between them. "Take the money from the safe," Gabriel told her. "It's clean. It will pay the debts. It will buy a house where the doors don't splinter." Chloe looked at the box, and then at the man standing in front of her. She thought about the night before, the diner, the boiling coffee, the way he had stood between her and a bullet without a second thought. He was a criminal. He was a killer. But in a world that had only ever taken from her, he was the first person who had offered her a shield. "If I take the money," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "do I ever see you again?" Gabriel froze. The question caught him entirely off guard. In his world, people took the money and ran. They didn't look back. They certainly didn't ask the monster to stay. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the cynical waitress who had served him black coffee. He saw the terrified daughter holding a trowel in a dark bathroom. He saw the woman who had bandaged his bloody knuckles before he went to war. "I am a dangerous man, Chloe," Gabriel said, his voice tight. "The life I lead, it doesn't leave room for light. It ruins everything it touches." Chloe slid off the bar stool. Her orthopedic shoes gave a faint squeak against the pristine hardwood floor. She stepped closer to him, invading his space, ignoring the warning screaming in his eyes. "I work the graveyard shift, Gabriel," she said, her tone deadpan, but her eyes softening. "I'm used to the dark." She reached out and gently brushed a stray drop of rainwater from the lapel of his ruined shirt. Gabriel closed his eyes. The breath he let out was shaky, carrying 12 years of buried grief and isolation. He raised his hand, the one she had bandaged, and rested it tentatively over hers. He didn't know how to be a good man. He didn't know if he could ever wash the blood from his ledger. But as he stood in the quiet kitchen holding the hand of the daughter of the man he had hated most in the world, Gabriel Costa realized the war was finally over, and for the first time in his life, he didn't want to sit in the booth facing the door. He just wanted to go home. Gabriel dismantled his own family to uncover the truth, but in the ashes of his empire, he found something he never expected: a reason to stop fighting. Chloe and Gabriel's worlds collided in a roadside diner, proving that sometimes the darkest secrets lead us to the exact person meant to pull us into the light. Will Gabriel truly leave his violent past behind, or does the Mafia life never really let you go? If you love this story, hit the like button, share it with a fellow romance drama fan, and subscribe for more.